Well, good afternoon, Corrine and Francois.
Good afternoon.
We're thrilled to have you join us this evening for our tasting of your wines. Is it 5 o'clock in the afternoon there?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, it's 5 o'clock. Yes.
And
It's
what is it?
Sunny and cold afternoon.
Sunny. Well, it's cloudy and cold here. It's kind of a raw day, but it's brightened by these lovely wines I'm getting ready to taste with you.
Mm-hmm. For us, it's a good time to taste wine. And for you, what time is it?
10 a.m.
Okay.
Well, that's also a good time for tasting, don't worry.
Well, it's always a good time to taste wine within, appropriate quantities. Since I've been doing these Zoom tastings, I taste a lot of wine at 10 o'clock in the morning because we do so many with European wineries. So tell us, each of you tell us a little bit about, please. Well, first, everyone should, what's the name? Everyone should pour themselves a glass of the Cremant d'Alsace Rosé while we start talking. And Allison, who is this, identified as Wilson Daniels?
Oh, this is Kimberly. Sorry.
Kimberly is she's the portfolio of the brand manager for Pierre Sparr at Wilson Daniels. So she's in Napa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that makes me a little nervous. I hope I don't do anything.
Good. She wanted to get more support.
Embarrass myself. So, Corrine and Francois, would you tell us a little bit about how you ended up being the winemaker and general manager of Pierre Sparr? What is your path?
Yeah, so perhaps I will perhaps begin a little bit to explain what is Pierre Sparr Winery and where we are located, and let's say about the general situation of the winery. Okay. Hello, Kimberly. Nice to see you.
Hello.
And so Pierre Sparr Winery is a quite old, or let's say very old winery, which was created in the 17th century. Can you
hold on just 1 second, please?
Okay.
What? Yes? You have people that want to come in here already? I'm sorry, I've got to relocate. So if you'll, and I apologize, but so Francois, you were beginning to tell us a little bit about the history of Pierre Sparr, which is a long, long history.
Yes. So hello, it's really interesting to speak about the Pierre Sparr winery story. It began in the 17th century. It was always located in Sigolsheim, which is a small village near to Colmar in middle south of Alsace. And it's very close to villages like Kaisersberg or Rickwihr, which are very famous for the wines and where we have a part of our vineyards. The Pierre Sparr family story began in the 17th century. It developed quite slowly, normally as a family wine growers and so on. And the real development came, in fact, in the early 20th century. But then the winery began to invest, began to make exports, began to vinify on specific ways, and to create a style of Pierre Sparr wines. To give an idea of Alsace about history, it sounds to be quite complicated, but as we are between France and Germany at the French border, on the French side of the Rhine River, it was always, or very often, area where there were wars, where there were battles, and Alsace sometimes was French, sometimes was German, and it really was a matter in Alsace of families where the vineyards and all the people had a lot of changes all the times and were used to changes and to adapt. So the names of the Alsace villages are very often German names, the name of the people. My name, Fischer, is written on the German way of writing with the SCH It's very important when you try to write an email not to make the mistake. And so we really have, in this story, we were, for the last century, we were German at between 1870 and 1918. Then we were French. We were German again, of course, in the Second World War. And the Americans, we can say it like that, really freed again Alsace at the very end of the Second World War. So we have in Sigolsheim, on the top of a hill where we have also the Grand Cru Mambourg, which is one of the famous Alsace Grand Cru. We have a cemetery of American soldiers which battled and fought to deliver Alsace and Colmar specifically. So for the Pierre Sparr winery, it really developed in the 20th century, as I told you. And after the Second World War, where everything was destroyed, it was really rebuilt again. And there was the moment where they developed also the contracts, the agreements with several vine growers all around Alsace, from north to south. This makes that we have today about 10 hectares of own property and about 80 hectares of contracts with long-term partners, vintners, which are, Corrine will explain you a little bit later, which are all under specific conditions, way of practicing wine growing and so on, to really maintain the purity of the wines, to maintain the style we want and the type of maturities we are looking for. And really to have the chance to have vineyards about 80 miles from north to south of Alsace. We have, you can see the map. I will put it a little bit here. That's the map of Alsace wine region. Do you see it approximately, the yellow parts on the map?
Yes.
Very tiny band.
Yeah, right from here where it goes all near Alsace. So Alsace, you have to imagine on the left side, you have the rest of France and the Vosges Hills, which are here. And all along these Vosges Hills, it's about 1 to maximum 3 or 4 miles wide. We have the area where the altitude is between 200 and 400 or 450 meters of altitude. We have the vineyard. It takes from south to north. The north is even a little bit higher than what you can see here, but you have about 120 miles from south to north. And even if it's a very small vine region, it looks as being quite big, because from everywhere in Alsace, somewhere you look around, you can see somewhere vineyards, because it's always slightly on the hills. And so you, wherever you are, even if you are near the Rhine River, you just look over, it's 20 kilometers away, but you see the vineyards, you see them always somewhere. And this particularity of the Vosges Hills is very important to protect us from the rain coming from the west. And that makes that here in our region, especially around Colmar, we have only about 500 millimeters of rainfall every year, which is less than what you have in Bordeaux or in Nice or in the south of France in most areas. And this makes that we have really great white wines concentrated. But it's a particularity of Alsace. And also you can see the Vosges Hills. You have then the Rhine River. And on the other side, you do not see it here, but it's in Germany. You have the Black Forest, which is also similar to the Vosges Hills. And you have to imagine that all this from here to the other side, to the German side, it was one big mountain, bigger than the Alps, a few 100,000 years ago.
Long time.
Very long time ago. And at the moment, all that crashed down and formed the Alsace and Rhine River Valley. And all this crashing down makes that you have to see the hill between Vosges and Black Forest like a big cake where you have different levels of pasta, of cream, of fruit and everything. You have to imagine that all the soils you have between our earth directly and 2 kilometers down, all these soils are like plotted here, and you can find in small areas like here around Rimobile or Kaisersberg, you can find about 5 or 10 different types of soils on only 200 or 500 meters. And so that makes that Alsace is a real mosaic of specificities of different type of wines. And that's the job of Corrine and of all of us to make the best of it.
It's a little similar to the Vosges Mountains are similar to the Cascade Mountains in Washington State in the United States and the Andes in Mendoza in Argentina.
Yes, in Andes, yeah.
The rain is coming from the west. The rain falls on the western side of the mountains, creating, you know, in the case of Washington State and Mendoza, a high desert, where you don't much have to worry about it raining at the wrong time. Because it never rains.
Yeah, we are protected.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, you know, in our minds, Seattle, it rains there all day long every day in Washington State. But in the eastern part of the state, it's a desert. It never rains because all the rain falls on the western side of it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the political instability. So at various times, Alsace has been German or French, but the people of Alsace they're the same, right? The population is the same,
and they speak Alsatian.
Well, this is where so when Germany, when Alsace is part of Germany, Alsatians don't speak German. When Alsace is part of France, they
don't speak French.
But they do you think, I mean, do Alsatians think of themselves as French or do they think of themselves as Alsatian?
That's an excellent question. Do you have a couple of weeks to explain all of that?
Well, I asked, do you know Ernie Lozen in the Mosel?
Yeah.
You know Ernie Lozen? I asked him one question last week and he talked for 45 minutes.
Yeah, no, I will make it short. In Alsace, I say sometimes as a joke, but it's only partly a joke. You know, all the battles and the wars we had in Europe, a lot of times it was around Alsace. And it's very important to be in Alsace because you realize that all the countries around fight to have Alsace with them because it's a wonderful region. Yeah. And the second point, it's also very important to live in Alsace in a war because at the end you are always on the side of the winners.
I guess so, yeah. That's that's an interesting.
But the most important is that somewhere we take the best of both countries. Yeah. We have, let's say, rather the German side for the organization, for the being strict and organized and making the things correctly and on the good way. And
faithful.
And faithful. And we are French for the gastronomy, for the fun side, let's say for the nice side of the things. And so we'll say we are rather French, but we are happy to have the German, the German good side, let's say it like that. And so, for example, in my family, I had to learn French at school because in my family we spoke Alsatian, which is a German dialect. But the German dialect Alsatian, when you are here on the western side of the Rhine River or on the eastern side in Germany, the dialects are totally similar. When you go from here to here, you speak the same language. But if you go from here to here, which is in France and in Alsace, you have more differences. From north to south of Alsace, you have as much differences in dialect than you have from Hamburg to Südtirol. It's really important to know that, because when you go back a little bit more back, Alsace history, when you go back to the barbarians invading Europe, between the Huns, the Alamans, the Franks, and so on, you had the Frank barbarians, which were on the northern part of Alsace, and of course to Belgium and so on. And you had the Alamans, which were on this from slightly over Strasbourg to the south of Alsace. And you have a forest about 20 kilometers in the north of Strasbourg, where the difference on 10 kilometers from one side of the forest to the other, honestly, you have a difference, you have words totally different, you have things you cannot correctly understand if you are not used to it. And that makes that this is really a dialect coming from back to 12th centuries or something like that. And it's really very important. And so all this makes that we have Alsace unity. It's a very beautiful region with a lot of specific things, but we have the Alsatian dialect where we can speak with other people in the villages and with a lot of history and histories.
Well, I'm not sure it's still the case, but there was a time when there were more Michelin-starred restaurants in Alsace than there were in Paris.
Restaurants, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. We have when I was young, the first time I had the Michelin guide in my hand, I was wondering why they had to create a specific map for Alsace, because the little stars were too many all over Alsace. We have about in Alsace how many Michelin guide?
I don't know, but
about 20, 25.
There were three or four restaurants by village.
Yeah, and yeah, here in Biblenheim we have 3 restaurants for only 500 or 800 inhabitants.
Does the restaurant Crocodile still exist?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, in Strasbourg.
It has changed. It has changed the owner, but it still exists.
The chef from Le Crocodile came to the United States and prepared a dinner at a resort called the Inn at Blackberry Farm about, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago. And it was one of the greatest meals I've ever eaten. And of course, there's Auberge de Lille, which at one time might have been the best restaurant in the world in Alsace. But that's French, that's not German.
No, that's the French side of Alsace. Yes, that's it.
I mean, there are great German restaurants, but they're, but not.
But you know, it's also a chance for Alsace to be in this part of Europe. You just have to imagine from Colmar, if you make a circle going where the center is in Colmar and it touches Paris, you have just to imagine that it's much easier for us to go to Milano, to go to all Switzerland, to go to Frankfurt, to go to Köln, to go to the biggest part of Belgium or Netherlands. It's simply for us, it's historically, Alsace doesn't go naturally to Paris. Alsace goes along the Rhine River from Switzerland or even Italy or until the Scandinavia. And that's also a reason why the Scandinavian countries are big Alsace wine consumers, because historically in the Middle Ages, we already exported as much as we export nowadays to Scandinavia, simply because it was the easiest way through the Rhine River to go by boat from Alsace to the North Sea. And that's also a reason why we have in Alsace quite important gastronomy of seafood, because okay, the boats went to Netherlands and to Scandinavia, but they brought back roll mops and salmon, and we had salmon in the Rhine River, but fish of the North Sea.
And it goes very well with white wine.
Yeah.
Which one of you makes better choucroute garni?
Qui fait la meilleure choucroute garnie de nous deux? The restaurant for me.
Yeah, well, I try, but I don't know.
So talk to us a little bit.
I'm not from Alsace.
Oh,
so
well, no.
I have an excuse.
Where are you from originally?
Yeah, I'm from Lyon. I was born in Lyon. It's a big city north of the Rhone Valley, near the Beaujolais. So it's more a region. Sorry?
I've been to Lyon several times.
Yeah, it's a big town. It's more a region of red wine. But well, I was
red and white. Why did you, growing up in Lyon, how did you end up in Alsace? Why didn't you end up in Burgundy?
Yeah, I was not from agricultural family, not at all. My parents were government officer employees. So, but I was really interested in biology and agriculture. So I went to study agriculture in Lyon, and I was introduced to enology during a job student. I went for the harvest in the Beaujolais, and I fell in love with this world, with this kind of alchemy that transformed a grape, a fruit, into a wonderful beverage. So I finished my agricultural courses as an engineer level, and then I went to Dijon in Burgundy to study enology, and I graduated in the National Enologist Diploma in 1994. So that's it. I worked a little bit in Oregon and in Australia, but my first real job, when I was looking for a job, I found it in Alsace. It was a kind of discovery for me, but I fell in love with this region because it's really very nice to live in Alsace. It's like living in a postcard. It's a very tiny, very little region, very nice. It's really a good place to live when you love good food, good wine. People are friendly. So now I'm in Alsace since 1994.
Where did you work in Oregon?
At Domaine Drouin.
That's the obvious.
On Pinot Noir. Yeah.
That's the obvious assumption,
Yes.
that it would be a Domaine Drouin.
Yeah.
But again, that's Pinot Gris and Pinot Noir mostly. And where did you work in Australia?
Near Melbourne, at Dromana Estate Vineyard. It's a very small winery that produces Italian style red wines.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So.
So talk to us a little bit about the Cremant d'Alsace Rosé, Brut Rosé.
Yes.
Please.
Yeah. So anyway, Alsace is a paradise for the winemakers because you can do all the kind of wines you want, from sparkling to still wine, dry, white wines, sweet wines, red wines. So the Cremant is one of the most. It's probably the wine where you have the most numerous rules. So we follow AOC rules, obviously, and there are very numerous. They tell us the density of the vineyards, the yields, the date of the harvest, when to go to harvest, even the installation in the press room, and the way to elaborate the Cremant. Cremant are made according to the method traditionnelle, that is the same method as champagne, the second fermentation in bottle. And at Pierre Sparr, we are elaborating white Cremant with two varieties, Pinot Blanc and Pinot Auxerrois. Pinot Blanc for the freshness, the acidity, the structure, and Pinot Auxerrois for the fruitiness. And for the rosé, we don't have the choice. It's another specificity of Alsace. It's 100% Pinot Noir. It's our only red variety, and we do rosé still wine with rosé and red wine, and crément rosé with this variety. So if you look, sorry.
The Appellation Contrôlée actually tells you when to harvest the grapes, right?
They tell us when we can begin to go to harvest, but at Pierre Sparr we go a lot further than just going at this time. We do a lot of tests. We take samples in all our plots to find the best date to go to harvest our parcels.
Do you say
Sorry?
Sparr or Sparr?
Sparr.
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 Okay, I got to change that. I've been mispronouncing the name of your winery for a long time, and I don't want to do that. So the rosé is 100% Pinot Noir, and that that really comes through in the wine. It's rich. It's kind of rich.
Yes.
Lovely red fruits. And
the Pinot Noir will give to this wine the nice pink color, but also the aromas, because we press it during a long time. It's a gentle pneumatic pressing during 6 hours to allow the aromas and the color from the skin of the Pinot Noir to dissolve into the juice. So you will find raspberry and strawberry notes on the nose, and in the mouth, just after the effervescence, you will find the structure of the grape. The Pinot Noir always give a lot of structure to the wines, so it's there's a little bit more tannins and strength in the rosé than in a white crément, for example. If you want to have it at a festive aperitif, it will be okay. In France, we are really fond of crément rosé for weddings because it's the glamorous touch, the French touch. But you can also have it with red fruit desserts, like a red fruit crumble, for example. And I really like it with blue cheese, like Roquefort with strong cheese. I think it's really an unusual association, but it really goes very well with blue cheese, or sometimes with exotic meal, like a fish in coconut milk, for example. It's really interesting to have it with that.
On your website, it says it's good with barbecue.
Oh yeah. It's okay with. I prefer it with grilled fish than with meat, but it's my choice.
When it says that on the website, it's good with barbecue. By barbecue, do you mean what we in this country think of as barbecue, as in long, slow, smoked pork, like ribs, and a kind of generally sweet, tangy sauce? Is that what you mean by barbecue?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a fish eater. Don't forget my name. Forget my name. But I eat fish only on Friday, because in Alsace it's what you have in the restaurant on Friday. So it's like that. But for the rest of the time, I rather ribs or tender chicken grilled on the barbecue with a little bit of spices and herbs on it. And effectively, for me, crément rosé matches well. It's, let's say, also sometimes it's a good opportunity to begin with the aperitif, and after, if you like it, you continue. If you prefer to drink a white or a red, it's the matter of everybody, because everybody has his own palate and his own preferences. And as Corrine said, with the cheese, it's effectively for an interesting match with cheese. But I would say it's more a matter of everybody to taste. People have to taste and to take 2 or 3 different wines once they are a few people together, because the most interesting is to switch from one to the other and to get a new adventure, a new experience of the taste.
Interesting that again, Ernie Lozen last week mentioned that he at a dinner with his wines in Tokyo, they served a piece of fish in a spicy coconut milk broth, and you mentioned coconut milk. And,
and that's interesting. Yeah,
when
for a barbecue, I will have it with tuna, on grilled tuna.
Well, it's an interesting coincidence that spicy coconut milk comes up twice in a week. I mean, I would never, if you asked me what food would pair well with Cremant d'Alsace Rosé, barbecue would never have been. I would have listed 500 things before I would have listed barbecue. But now, tasting this and thinking about that, it seems perfect. I think it actually is perfect, because the rosé is a little bit fruity, and it's certainly weighty enough to stand up to the smoked pork, and the bubbles kind of cut through the sweetness a little bit. I think I mean, I don't think we agonize over those issues too much, and good food, good wine, works.
Good.
I mean, you don't want to drink Australian, Italian wines with a nice piece of grilled fresh fish, but you can spend too much time agonizing over those issues, I think. So I want to tell you that your Riesling is an important wine to me. About 3 years ago, I moved to Oklahoma City to help some people open a very, very fine French restaurant. Kind of, if the Michelin Guide was in Oklahoma City, they would probably give it 1.5 stars or something like that. It actually is a really fine restaurant, in spite of being in Oklahoma City. And I was the general manager and maitre d' and sommelier, and I put your Riesling on the wine list there because I just thought it was perfect with some of the dishes that we served, and I even put it on the tasting menu with one course. But the owners told me that I had to change the Alsatian Riesling on the list because the Pierre Sparr was too oaky.
Too oaky?
Yes.
The Riesling?
And that's when I knew that I was in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Well, there's no oak at all in the Pierre Sparr Riesling.
There is absolutely no oak character in this wine whatsoever, and I couldn't convince them that they were wrong. I mean, they just were absolutely 100% convinced that your Riesling, this wine we're tasting right now, I think it was probably the 2014 vintage, maybe, was too oaky for their food, and I just.
Or maybe it was the mineral notes. There was a confusion with the evolution aromas of the Riesling, but no oak. that's for sure.
That's the point. There is absolutely no oak in exposure in the production of the wine, and there's absolutely no oak character in the wine. And I couldn't convince them that they were wrong. And I mean, it's not the reason things didn't work out, but it was the first straw, as they say.
It's completely forbidden anyway. It's completely forbidden in AOC, and there's no interest, because what we are looking for is the purity, the expression of each variety. We have 7 varieties, and we want every wine to be typical of the variety and of the soil. So there's no interest of putting any oak.
Exactly. Exactly.
If we want to, we are going to taste the vintage 2018.
Yeah.
18,
Yes.
okay. So this vintage was really very generous in quality and in quantity. We had a lot of rain during winter to fill the soil reserves, and then in the summer and in the autumn we have very sunny and drought conditions. So the vintage was really nice. During harvest, the sun was shining, and it was very long harvest, around 8 weeks of harvest. But the result is really interesting. This Riesling, the Riesling is my favorite variety because it's known as being the king of Alsatian varieties, and it's probably the variety that reveals the best the subtlety of the soils. We have quite old vines, around 30 or more years old, and the roots go very deep into the rock and feed the plants with the rock nutrients. So you can have, as François said, with the mosaic of the soils, we can have on a very small vineyard a lot of different, very different wines. It depends on the soil, if it's gneiss, if it's schist, or if it's granitic soils. It's really very different. So the majority of our Riesling are on granite and chalky clay, and so if you look at this glass, you will find a wine with a pale and bright color, but the nose is very expressive and refined, and that's what we are really looking for. The bouquet is very elegant with floral and citrus notes. And you have as well as a mineral touch, and that's the sign of the granitic origin. It's also the time of bottling, the time, the long time the wine stay in bottle. But when you have granitic soil, the mineral touch is more present, and that's really the kind of Riesling I like. With spicy aromas, high quality flavors, and in the mouth, at the palate, the freshness of the variety. Very long lasting citrus flavors, so that's really interesting. It keeps very a long time in the mouth. Well, I'm sorry, but I will again associate this Riesling with fish, all kind of fish, but also sheltray. Or sushi. That's really interesting with sushi. It's my best association. But if you want to have it on a dessert, you can try it on a lemon pie with meringue, and that's really a good thing to taste.
That actually would be pretty good. You know,
I'm not sure with barbecue.
I think Riesling is the most misunderstood grape in the world. People ask me a lot, what's your favorite wine? And I generally say, I don't have favorite wines. My favorite wine depends on who I'm drinking it with, what I'm drinking it with, what the temperature is outside. I don't want to drink the same wine when it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit as I want to drink when it's 20 below Fahrenheit, as it sometimes is here in Minnesota. I don't want to drink the same wine with a piece of barbecued ribs as I want to drink with grilled, salmon. Well, let's say grilled snapper, red snapper. But if you held my feet to the fire and said, "What's your favorite wines?" It's Riesling. And when I say that to the average person, there's always this just look of disbelief, like how you're supposed to be this really sophisticated, guy, And how could you possibly think Riesling is your favorite wine? And that's based on, you know, that person that has that reaction. They think of Riesling, their opinion of Riesling is based on Blue Nun Liefraumilch, which is not Riesling, or really awful German Rieslings like, you know, giant production wines like a wine that used to be so popular here called Zeller's Schwarzekatz, or, you know, Washington State Rieslings from Chateau Ste. Michelle that are just sweet and
yeah. They say it's the same variety, but the wines are really different.
But they've never actually, the person that has that opinion has never actually tasted something like
Really?
this.
Yeah.
But then, of course, there's the really amazing sweet wines that they've also never tasted. You know, so the opinion, their opinion is so misinformed, and it's hard to have a conversation with that person, because when you try to help them understand, what they actually hear is you're wrong. And
you don't
say,
speak about the same thing.
Yeah, you don't want to say you're wrong to a customer. It's tough, you know. And I mean, this wine is, for what, it's inexpensive and it's really superb. I mean, it's a superb
Yeah, it's
wine.
Yeah, I agree. It's not expensive enough.
Well, no, I didn't mean that.
No,
Francois, do not raise the price.
No, don't
Kimberly,
worry.
do not raise the price. Allison, do not raise.
I will arrange that. Don't worry.
No, it's really a good wine. Riesling is a wonderful variety, but you have to be very kind with it. At Pierre Sparr, we picked all our grapes at the good moment and hand-picked. We put every grapes in the press before 6 hours maximum. We don't want oxidation. We press it gently. It's a physical settling during 24 hours. The fermentation is very long at cold temperature in stainless steel tanks. So you have to take care of it, but after that, it's the results are always wonderful. So it's really a good variety.
I spent a lot of time growing up on a farm in the southern United States that my family owned, pretty large farm, and we would go there on weekends, and a lot of times on Saturday night we would go frog gigging. So I don't know if you know what frog gigging is, but one person would have a strong flashlight and the other one would have a frog gig, which was a long pole with a 3-pronged barb on the end. And the person with the flashlight would shine the flashlight around the edge of a pond until it saw a frog's eyes staring back at it. And the light would hypnotize or hypnotize the frog, and you could sneak around behind it and gig it with spear it with the frog gig. And then we had a pillowcase that we would put the frogs in. We do that on Saturday night, and then Sunday morning my aunts would fry up the frog legs for Sunday breakfast or Sunday brunch, and they were so delicious because they were so fresh. And and it's, maybe that's why I love Alsatian wine so much, is because of the frog legs in Alsace and the frog legs I grew up eating. I don't know. I know that,
But if you are a frog, it's very dangerous to live in Alsace because of the storks. We have more and more storks, and they are everywhere. And for frogs, it's really dangerous to live here.
It was dangerous to live on our farm on Saturday nights. I mean, we'd get a couple of dozen frogs, or more, and fry them up Sunday morning for all the cousins and everything. It was fantastic. Of course, in Alsace, you do them in cream sauce, but we just, battered them and fried them like fried chicken. They were delicious, really delicious. And if at that age, this wine would have been so fabulous with those frog legs on Sunday morning, but Of course, it's too young.
And what I wanted just to add to the comments and to the fact of Riesling, people always ask how long can we keep a Riesling, how old can we let him age. I'm perhaps a little bit extreme on that point, but for example, at home, I'm drinking the 85, 89 at the moment. So I also like very much the young ones, but a Riesling is really probably one of the best wines to age. But if you are not used to it, you have to buy 12 bottles and open one every 2 years simply to get used to it, because there will be an evolution of the mineral side coming more and more out. And with the time, if people are not used to Riesling, if they open a bottle of 89 or 2000 or something like that, which is 20 or 30 years old, you may be afraid.
They will say too oaky.
Yeah, probably. But in fact, it's the mineral. And so it's complicated for people if they are in a restaurant and they get an old bottle because they want to take an exceptional bottle. It can be surprising at least. But if people take the effort to perhaps buy a few bottles, even if it's quite a classic Riesling, simply on a good balance and so on, you keep the bottles, or some of them 2, 3, 4 years, simply to see how will be the evolution. And people so will get aware of the different evolutions about how Riesling can become great and how you can rediscover every Riesling on different type of its aging. It's really great and it's worth it.
Well, in our conversation last week with Ernie, I'm sorry for all the references to Ernie, but in our conversation with Ernie last week, we talked about tasting. I had with him in his wine cellar in Bernkastel. He opened in 1959 Gardner Pralat beer in Alsace in a half bottle of 35-year-old beer in Alsace Riesling, and it was absolutely stunning and youthful. You know, now it had been, his wine cellar is really, really cold and it had never been moved. But, you know, I mean, a 35-year-old half bottle is kind of like a 55-year-old, you know, regular bottle.
Yeah.
And it was not, I mean, it had a long, long life ahead of it. It was a glorious wine. And I told him that at my store in Nashville several years ago, one day I opened a bottle of, I think it was St. Urbanshof Achvener Bachstein Cabinet, but it was somebody's Achvener Bachstein Cabinet for a customer to taste because I thought he'd really love it. I didn't put the cork back in. I put it in the reach-in cooler and forgot about it. And about 6 months later, I stumbled on this bottle of wine that had been sitting in the cooler unopened without the cork in it for 6 months, poured myself a glass, and it was absolutely fabulous. So Riesling I mean, it's kind of hard to explain that. It should have been oxidized, but it does have this incredible aging curve that's amazing. Yeah. We talked with Keimel River from New Zealand recently. I think that was actually last week too. And we talked a lot about the Stelvin closure, their decision to go to all Stelvin in, was it 2001, Allison? And which at the time was incredibly controversial for a winery that makes wines of the caliber that Keimel River makes to go to Stelvin. And you know, we talked a little bit about the effect of the screw caps on the aging curve of the wine. And Paul Brakovic, I mean, his opinion is it has no effect, that the aging process with Stelvin and the aging process with a really good cork, which is the issue, how many of your corks are really good corks, is basically the same, because what it is slow oxidation and there's the same amount of air in the bottle with a cork and a screw cap. How do you feel about that? What if, do you think the screw cap has an effect on the aging process of the wine?
What we have tasted at Pierre Sparr is that it's okay during 10 years. There's no problem with screw cap. The problem is when the bottling is not very well done. You have to taste, to check everything that's very good.
Yeah, you have, when you make the bottling with screw caps, you really have to have a good installation, a good process, under controlled air, filtered and so on, to make sure that the screw cap will be well.
You have to take off the oxygen first, and you have to check that the screw machine is really very efficient. Well, very efficient. Yeah. Because you can have bad surprise, and so here we check every hour. We check 10 bottles to be sure that everything is okay, and that we can send the bottle very far, and there will be no problem. Once everything is okay when bottling, the screw cap has no problem of aging.
Your Grand Cru's, you bottle your Grand Cru's with cork?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, he, in the conversation with him, he talked about they tasted 100 bottles of the same wine with corks, and a lot.
They're all different.
And every bottle's different. And there's 5 out of 100 that are just extraordinary. And there's 25 out of 100 that are flawed in some way, not just cork, but other ways too. Because every cork's different, and some corks are successful and some aren't.
Yeah, and for one very good, you have 9.
I used to be one of the sommeliers at the Wine Spectator wine experience that alternated between New York and San Francisco every year, and one of the jobs of the sommeliers was to taste every bottle of wine before it went out to the ballroom to be served to the guests. And so you would taste 120 bottles, 10 cases of the same wine right in a row, which is not something that you really do very often in life. But what you discover when you taste 120 bottles of the same wine is that there are 120 different bottles of wine. Again, there's maybe a dozen that are absolutely spectacular and stand out. There's a couple of dozen, or maybe a dozen, that aren't even servable at that time. That was probably the ratio. And then there's the ones in the middle that are, okay, but they're all different. Every bottle's different. I mean, every bottle's different. And one year, one of the tastings was a port tasting with the owners of Taylor and Fonseca and Graham's, and a cork. The Taylor, 1970 Taylor, was assigned to a well-known master sommelier, and he missed a cork bottle, and it went to the head table. And Alistair Robertson, the owner of Taylor, said, my glass of Taylor, 1970 Taylor, is corked. And of course, at that point, everybody in the room thinks they're, if Alistair Robertson thinks his glass is corked, the other 1,000 people in the room also think their glass is corked. And it was a nightmare, because all the wine had been poured. There was no more wine. And so we didn't even have a glass to give Mr. Robertson,
Thank you.
So congratulations. I mean, I applaud your decision to go to Stelvin on the Grand Reserve wines.
Thanks.
So Pinot Gris, let's talk about this.
Yes, it's the three wines we have presented today will be a very short extract of what we can do in Alsace, a sparkling wine, a dry wine, and now with Pinot Gris we'll find a more generous wine with a little more residual sugar, even if it's quite dry, but it's full-bodied. This Pinot Gris, obviously it's the same harvest, it's the same vintage, but the color is stronger. It's a beautiful yellow gold color. It's due to Pinot Gris, because Pinot Gris has always more color, especially when it's very ripe. So the color of the grapes go naturally in the juice, and we have really a very typical Pinot Gris nose. The bouquet is very refined, but it's more with smoky notes, like toasted bread, floral notes also. There's a lot of complexity in Pinot Gris. The aromas are very complex, and the more you aerate the wine, the more notes you will find, like apricots or honey or gingerbread. You will find everything in Pinot Gris. In the mouth, as I said, the wine is really full-bodied, opulent, generous. You have this little touch of residual sugar, but the attack is quite fresh, very long in the mouth, and it's really structured. There's a lot of structure in Pinot Gris. It's a strong wine. It's the wine we usually taste at the end of our tastings, just before Gewürztraminer. So it's a kind of wine you can serve with meal usually reserved to red wine, like meat this time, veal roast or pork roast. But you can also have it with truffled mashed potatoes, and that's a really good association. Or with Comté, with cheese from the Jura. It's really good, and also Pinot Gris with Comté will be wonderful. Or with mushrooms, mushrooms just
as soon as you have something from the forest.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I'm very fond of exotic meal, and I often serve the Pinot Gris with tagine, with prunes and apricots, and that's a really good thing too, because you don't feel the sugar. It's really goes very well with the meals with a lot of sauce, and it's really wonderful.
I was thinking of just a roast chicken with wild mushrooms would be pretty darn good, but anything with apricots would be fantastic.
Yes, because you have this nose of dried apricots in the wine, so it's really good.
I often find that wines with stelvin enclosure are, when you first open them, are really reductive, and I think would you agree that it's a good idea to open them 15 or 20 minutes in advance, or even decant them, because of the reductive character that
yes, that's true. Yeah. And in the glass you can pour it just 15 minutes before drink it, and in the glass with aeration you will have more and more aromas. That's true.
You mentioned well, I don't think you mentioned the word terroir, but you made reference to the terroir in Alsace, that the grapes reflect the specificity of the vineyard that they're grown in, and that Riesling grown in this vineyard is different from Riesling grown in this vineyard. That's a Burgundian thing. I mean, that's That's your childhood in Lyon coming through in your adult winemaking. That is absolutely a Burgundian in its essence concept, that the grapes are what's in the bottle is totally different based on where the grapes are grown.
Yeah, it's really important to have the differences between the different type of soils. Pinot Gris, for example, is by most of the vine growers. Every vine grower in Alsace has nearly the 7 varietals which are allowed in Alsace, because usually everybody wants to have a little bit of every varietal. Everybody wants to have the possibility to have different tastes, but also the possibility to avoid the frost, to avoid the dryness, to avoid hail, and so on. So it's important in Alsace to always get in mind that if you have only one varietal, even if Riesling is trendy, for example, if there is hail on one place, your harvest will be destroyed in one night or one day. So when you have different varietals, the vintners know by generation after generation that on this type of soil, this type of varietal has a better coming out or a better result. So Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc are rather on chalky, on clay, which is warmer, which develops more the aromas, and Riesling or Silvaner, which are not very famous in the United States, but this type of varietals will rather prefer other type of soils. And so it's generation after generation that people get the experience on what matches best on which soil. And even for a simple personal experience I made a long time ago when I began in the wine business. And I had one of my first wine fairs where I had to present some of our wines. And we had this year, I had to show Riesling on a Grand Cru, which is called Sonnenglanz. And on this Sonnenglanz Grand Cru, there is nearly 95% is planted with Pinot Gris or Gewürztraminer, but there is a little bit Riesling on this Grand Cru. And the first glass I poured of this Riesling Grand Cru Sonnenglanz, I was convinced at the first moment that probably somebody gave me a wrong bottle or labeled wrongly a bottle, because the Riesling was, let's say, too round, too expressive on very ripe fruit, and it looked really very strange. And I had to open a bottle of Pinot Gris Sonnenglanz simply to compare, and oh yes, there is a real difference. But the first moment, the Sonnenglanz Grand Cru really came out more than the varietal. So it's and that's immediately you realize that there was a reason there was only Pinot Gris or Gewürztraminer on this Grand Cru, because the Riesling is, let's say, strange or not as people expected.
Well, in those conversations I have with disbelieving people when I say I love Riesling, what I love most about Riesling is the transparency of it. And this is what you're talking about. There's a famous German vineyard called Braunberger Höfer, right? Make great wine in that vineyard. But then there's a little tiny part of that vineyard called Braunberger Höfer Sonnenur. And the wines made from grapes in the Sonnenur part of the Braunberger Höfer vineyard are totally different from the wines made from the grapes surrounding the Höfer, the Sonnenur portion of the Braunberger Höfer vineyard. Really, honestly, everything's the same, except this Sonnenur part is a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a little steeper, so the grapes get riper, so the wines are totally different. And that's, to me, that's just so magical. And
it's the sign of the really exceptional terroir to
be more important than the variety.
Well, when I took the Master Sommelier exam in '87, one of the questions was, you're on a barge going up the Mosel. Tell us what vineyards you pass and describe the wines from each. So how is Peaceport different from Valen? How is Valen different from Bernkastel? How is Bernkastel different from, you know, as you go up the vineyard? And again, it's everything's the same, but everything's totally different. And that's your comment about the Sonnenglans vineyard, that it was the vineyard that you were tasting that seemed wrong. It couldn't be Riesling. It didn't taste like Riesling.
It couldn't be.
Like with Sonnenglans.
Yeah. And on the other side, we have at Pierre Sparr Winery, we have a Riesling Grand Cru Schönenburg, which is in Riquewihr, which is really a great exposure to the south and a great terroir, very slopes. And in this area, you only find Riesling. There is nothing else inside, simply because for centuries, people have realized that Riesling is the best coming out from this area. And there is no place for Gewürztraminer or Pinot Gris. It would probably not be bad, but it's not what people expect. It's not the great Grand Cru. A Grand Cru is important to have a specificity, to have the expression of the terroir, and to have from one vintner to the other, which are on the same area, you have to find the soil, the common point of this Grand Cru. And these Grand Cru are, all of them are renowned for centuries. And so it's really, you know, Alsace, the history of wine growing in Alsace was in the Roman times. And so it's 2000 years of history. It's the same as in Bordeaux or Burgundy or somewhere else. It's not because it's more in the north that we have less history. It's really a very long time history in Alsace of vine growing. And there were ages in Alsace in the Middle Ages, in the 18th century and beginning of 19th century, where the vineyard was much bigger in Alsace than it is now. Of course, now we have the best places,
the best part.
Before, the wine needs were so big and so interesting for the farmers that they planted vineyards everywhere possible. Now we have really the best places, the best areas where it's good to plant some vineyards.
Well, you know, you mentioned the vineyards. A lot of the vineyards were planted by Roman legions. That's a long time ago. But in the meantime, for a long time, the vineyards were managed or tended by monks, right, and by religious orders. And those, if you think about it, monks didn't really have very much to do. They ate, slept, prayed, and took care of the vines.
And drink.
Yeah. And if you know that you get to know the vines pretty intimately if there's no TV or internet. I mean, just think about how focused they were on the vineyards, and after a while, you know where Riesling's going to do best, where Pinot Gris is going to do best, where Gewürztraminer is going to do best. That's, you know, the vineyards in Germany, the Romans decided where to plant based on where the snow melted first, right? Because that's where the grapes would get ripe. Corrine, I loved your comment about the Pinot Gris and Comté cheese. You know, in the early 90s, I was the sommelier at an important restaurant, and with a really what's now a really famous chef, and a huge 3,000 wines in our wine cellar, and it's a pretty amazing restaurant. But I started telling people that this red wine with cheese thing really doesn't work all that well. And that we should be serving white wine with most cheese. Yeah,
absolutely.
And, I mean, again, people thought I'd lost my mind. I mean, what do you mean? What do you mean red wine and cheese? I mean, there are some red wines that taste good with cheese, you know. Brunello di Montalcino and Reggiano taste good together, and Port and Stilton taste good together. But you know, at that time, if you ordered a cheese course in a restaurant in the United States, it generally had brie, Gouda, and some kind of blue cheese on it, or brie, cheddar, and some kind of blue cheese on it. And tell me a red wine that tastes good with brie.
We both, no, no.
Tell me a red wine that tastes good with cheddar or Gouda. It just doesn't. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But Pinot Gris and Vouvray was. I mean, you know, it's fantastic. I mean, it's fantastic with cheeses
And we,
like what you
we didn't speak about the association between Gewürztraminer and Munster,
Strong cheese,
which is really terrific.
But we served at Poisse, which I just love it. Poisse with Vouvray, with like Huet Vouvray, and you know, people still thought I was crazy, but they got that it worked, I guess. So this has been fantastic. I really appreciate your time today. I generally end these conversations with one question, and you're not prepared for this question, so I'm sorry for springing it on you. But my question is, tell me a memorable wine experience in your life. And I'm not asking you what's the greatest wine you've ever tasted, because that's just bragging. I'm asking you a memorable wine experience from your life in wine, a memorable experience from your life in wine.
Okay. The first time for me, I'm very fond of dry wines, but the first time I come in Alsace for a weekend, for a visiting, a long time ago, I went to Zintumbrecht, and I bought the more expensive wine I've ever bought in my life. I was a student, and it was a Gewürztraminer Sélection Grenoble, so with a big amount of sugar, residual sugar, and I bring it home, and I have it just for it in front of the chimney of the fireplace. Just me and my boyfriend and Gewürztraminer Sélection Grenoble of Zintumbrecht, and it was just near the paradise.
Did your boyfriend? Are you still with the boyfriend?
No, but I'm still with the wine.
I would think most young men, if you poured them a glass of Zintumbrecht, was it Riesling?
No, it was a Gewürztraminer.
Gewürztraminer. I think you said that. I'm sorry.
But you have to be careful, because in Alsace they say that when you drink Gewürztraminer, you make les jumeaux.
Twins.
Twins. You have twins. When you're pregnant, you have twins. So be careful.
Well, any man that you opened a bottle of Zintumbrecht Sélection de Grenoble for that didn't immediately ask you to marry him was a fool.
Yeah, you should have done.
That's an interesting question. I asked, we had one of these conversations with Jeremy Sace from Domaine du Jacques, and I asked him, why is DRC so, 10 times as expensive as your wines? They're not that much better. And he said, we were there a few months ago and we tasted their current release, and we don't even begin to even understand what they're doing at their winery. Their wines they're another world. Zintumbrecht is kind of the DRC of Alsace, right?
Yeah.
They are And Allison, a couple of weeks ago, we had a tasting with Marco Del Forno, who was at his cork supplier's house in his first year of making wine. He was at his cork supplier's house, and there was a bottle of Quintarelli Amarone on the shelf. And he asked the cork supplier, "What is that? I've never seen that label before." and the cork supplier, his voice got very hushed and reverential. And Marco Laforno's father said, "Why are you talking that way?" And he said, "Well, because that's God," referring to Giuseppe Quintarelli. So there are these wineries that are kind of, you know, so extraordinary, so special that you do have to be a little reverential, you know.
We have a few.
Yeah.
Trimbach. Well, and I mean, I'm not disparaging your wines. I told you I love your wines. I really love your wines. And yeah. So Francois, do you have an answer to that question?
Well, I will say one of my experiences, quite funny, was the first Vin Expo I made in Bordeaux. And I love eating rabbit prepared with mustard. And by opening the bottles at the first days in the morning with my former boss at this time, I said, "Oh, that's strange. It's smelling mustard." He stared at me. "Okay, are you joking?" Or, well, for me, it's my experience to smell mustard. It was Riesling. We continued. It was honestly, I don't remember which Riesling it was. We opened several bottles to be prepared for the fair, and all of them, to my mind, to my taste, smelled about mustard. And the boss was quite thinking, probably I'm a little bit strange or something like that. And the following days, I went to the other places, to the other stands, to Australia, to Chile. Chile had a very big stand, very near to our stand, to Germany. And everywhere on Riesling, I smelled mustard. It was so far that even my boss made a test with me I told him, "Okay, try to find a glass somewhere on another stand or two glasses, and I will tell you which one is the Riesling." And it was a Riesling from Israel. I found the mustard, so I said, "This one must be Riesling." It was totally different from Riesling from Alsace. That had nothing to do. And so there I realized that, in fact, every taste of everybody is a matter of own experience, own tasting, own what you like, what you experienced previously, and so on. And it's not always a matter of what is written in the book and what you can see on the label or so. If you drink, or if you had I don't know, chocolate with hazelnut just before, your Pinot Gris will be probably different than if you had chewing gum with mint or mint or something like that. So it's really always a personal experience, and always have to keep modest or humble with what people say. It's if they smell something specific, at first sight you could think it's strange, but it's probably because their experience, their olfactive experience, it's somewhere different, because they are used to more spicy eatings, to more I don't know, more fruits, more vegetables, more fish, more whatever you want, and your own palate will be on a different format than what I am used to eat or drink myself. And so it's very important to share and to experience. But this mustard, no, I have lost it. I'm a little bit disappointed, because I thought at it a few days ago, and but it was very funny, specifically when you are somewhere like a big fair where you have lots of different wines, and to find somewhere a specific point which was very strange, but for me easy to recognize.
I thought you were going to tell me you'd spilled some mustard on your shirt eating rabbit with mustard sauce, and that you'd been smelling the mustard on your shirt all for 2 days.
Well,
you know, Clive Coates, the famous Burgundy writer Clive Coates, told me once that on the days of important wine tastings, he didn't brush his teeth or use deodorant because it would affect the way the wines tasted. So, I mean, I mean, everything
Yeah,
has an effect on whatever is in the air in this room right now
yeah,
has an effect on the way these wines smell and taste to me. That's just reality. And, you know, if I taste them tomorrow, they will taste different,
of course.
you know,
Cool.
because, you know, what did I have? How many cups of coffee have I had this morning is going to affect the way the wine tastes. Well, I want to thank you for your time. This has been fantastic. And
Thank
again,
you. Thank you for calling us.
I just love your wine. I just love your wines. I've loved them for a long time. And
Thanks.
thankfully, my opinion that there is no oak character in the Riesling has been corroborated, has been reinforced
Definitely.
today. And I'm going to email the owners of that restaurant and tell them that you said there is no oak in their Riesling.
Absolutely no oak.
I swear.
Well,
Thank you.
Kimberly and Allison, anything that I've left out or that you felt it was important we cover before we sign off?
No, this was great.
Well-
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Hope you have enjoyed the tasting.
Well,
No,
Francois,
it's not pretty.
Francois, I just want to
Yeah.
tell you that, you know, we're all living through difficult times right now. And it seems like every country is different and every month is different. And but if it weren't for COVID, we wouldn't have started these Zoom tastings and I wouldn't have spent this hour with you today. So there's good things about it too. But I hope that you and your families are not too badly affected by it, and that someday soon you can come to St. Paul and have another tasting with us in person.
Of
Thanks.
course, that's what we hope.
Yeah.
So
Take care.
thank you,
Absolutely.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And have a good aperitif time now for you.
Yeah,
For us.
And for us also. Cheers.
yeah, it's lunchtime.
Cheers.
Cheers.